Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Kay. And here's her story. Hi, Ollie. I'm Kay, my real name. This is one hell of a long one, so I hope my donation covers it, including throat lozenges. My story isn't about physical abuse or parents. My story is more along the lines of single white female and her headfuckery tactics. I've been through physical abuse, but quite frankly, for me at least, I found the following mental abuse worse. Hopefully, Ollie, it will give others some good examples of the covert narc tactics and how they behave when they fear being exposed. I include an email from the narc, which was, and still written in bright red, in the same font I use, and typed in similar style. Anything in black in her email are my comments. Previous to the email, I'll have to give you some background on events leading up to it. Her name hasn't been changed because I believe in exposing her for what she is, though some of the names have been to protect their identity and personal lives. Karen is the name of my ex-narc friend. I met her when I was 27 when she moved into my apartment. I know now she mirrored me. A previous physically abusive relationship, to name one. She even started calling herself my twin. I think the only thing we really had in common was lack of children. I didn't want them, and she couldn't have them. Previous to being married, her ex, Cole, had apparently given her chlamydia when she was 17 after sleeping around on her. Oh, isn't that awesome? She soon moved her new partner, Mick, in. That was until I was about to be evicted because my rent kept being canceled, apparently by me. I had to claim social because of my disability. After I got the rent up to date, she pretended to be homeless with Mick so they could get priority social housing, even though her parents lived just up the road. She started sleeping in Mick's horse box with him by choice. The traveler scene was all the rage. All her furniture, including her bed, was still in her bedroom at my apartment. She would come around early in the mornings when she knew I was asleep, take showers, use the toilet, turn the heating on, and do their washing. Rent up to date or not, I was now still going to be evicted. I had to confront her about paying half towards the gas bill as she kept putting off paying. She came round a few days later with some money saying she was saving it to give to me on my birthday. What the fuck? I'm sure the gas man didn't give a fuck when my birthday was. I'd already been cut off by then when I paid £50, $65, to be reconnected. She continued to sneakily do her washing, etc. A week before my eviction, Karen moved her things out back to her parents' house, and I moved into her smaller, warmer bedroom with the shower in. I got so low during this time, I ended up taking an overdose of my pain medication. Karen let herself into my apartment the morning I was released from the hospital. She seemed surprised that I was now in her old bedroom. I explained about the overdose as she was going on about something, and I wasn't very with it. She said she'd only come round to pick something up and promptly left. She'd been busted, in fact. Julie, a mutual friend of ours, came round and kept me mentally stable until I got rehoused. Karen and Mick had now been rehoused across from Julie. Karen didn't make any effort to see me after that, but if I went round to Julie's every time she would turn up out of the blue. I now know it was because Cole, Karen's chlamydia ex, was living with Julie. Karen didn't want us cross-referencing, and the reason why comes later. Anyway, I thankfully got rehoused. Julie and Cole moved to a nearby town and had kids. Karen went to university to do a degree in psychology, and I met a guy called Dan, my partner of 19 years now. When I was 32, I was properly diagnosed with a condition called Ehlers Danlos syndrome, EDS. It basically means all my soft tissues are overstretchy, so much so that my joints dislocate all the time. Another condition that is common with this is something called Shari malformation, or Chiari malformation. That's a herniation of the back of the brain into the brainstem. It not only blocks the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, causing hydrocephalitis and so major headaches, but it also means I have nerve pain, compression, resulting in severe migraines. The relevance of this will come later. Because it's a rare condition, I spent a lot of time on the internet talking to people with the same or similar conditions, or with people that had similar depression problems in life. Most of these were women with EDS, but a few guys too, such as Gay Dave with me and fibromyalgia, Vince, who was agoraphobic and depressed, and an American Indian lad with cerebral palsy, and a few others. All the women names I knew are irrelevant to mention, especially by Karen later on. It was around this time Karen came back into my life. She had been studying for her psychology degree at uni, and I got news of her having had a subarachnoid stroke. It occurred because she was taking a lot of speed, supposedly to keep her up studying, although she'd always taken it. She recovered after about a year and finished her degree. After that, she would call me almost daily, usually complaining about Mick. She told me one night how she had no sex drive after the stroke and how Mick had been forcing himself on her. I didn't quite believe he was that bad and advised her to have a chat with Mick, like I had to do with my partner Dan. I explained that me having, Chikari, etc., had left me with no sex drive too. The problem with Chikari, it had been a common problem with Chikari. It had been many years, and I explained to her how it made me feel a failure as a partner and how I only felt good enough as a housekeeper. I explained how I told Dan he could go elsewhere if he felt he needed to. But Dan said there was a lot more to life than sex. Being narc naive, I didn't realize she only wanted to make Mick look like an asshole, to pit me against him, isolate him, and how the personal information I gave her would be used against me later. Karen eventually gave Mick an ultimatum, his son or her. He lived in the same apartment block as me, and she got fed up with his son's drug use. It seems like there's a lot of drug use going on here. Okay, and the whole situation. She told me how she and Mick had gone to my neighbor's house to pay off his drug debt. Mick wasn't going to disown his son, and that's when the real shit started for him. She broke Mick's friendship with my partner, Dan, instantly, saying Dan was siding with her over his son and had called his son bad names. Mick moved out, and Karen bragged to me how he'd come round for his CDs, but she'd hidden them in the boot of her car, and how she told him he'd already taken them on a previous occasion, fucking with his head. I didn't think it was true because she was still going out for meals with him 3 times a week. Here in the UK, we don't eat out very often. When we do, it's either a special occasion or a date. She told me how, over every meal, he had said he loved her and wanted to move back in with her. She told me she wasn't interested, but how she fancied the chef. I raised my concern about her leading Mick on, but she kept going. But she kept going. She kept on going. She just didn't. She just didn't say. She told me that she was going to ask the chef out. A few days later, she told me she wasn't interested in him anymore because he was fat and liked football. Nope, he hadn't mutated overnight. He turned her down, he was married, and I guess she couldn't handle it. This was a scenario that repeated itself a lot over the following year or so, with many a man. I'm sorry I have to mention so many of them, but her email won't make sense without. The same thing happened over a guitarist in a band we saw. She forced her number on him, and even though he was engaged, she harassed him by using my Facebook account after insisting I friend the band so we knew when they were playing next. After a while, John the drummer contacted me saying he was working in town and would I meet him. He had a favor to ask, but didn't want to talk about it on Facebook. He didn't want Karen to know, so I did. He asked me if I would become personal friends with the guitarist on Facebook so I could show Karen he was now happily married. Hopefully that would get her to leave him alone. It worked, but again, she denied ever liking him. Instead, she said she just wanted him stuffed and mounted on the wall like a troll, whatever that meant. But I was expected to, unspokenly, go along with her new version of the truth to prevent her embarrassment. She used one guy at the pub to flirt around in front of Mick to make him jealous. She told me of how she had wound Mick up so much that he followed her home and started banging on the door, demanding she speak to him. I can now understand why he was so mad after all the meals, etc. And now this. She laughed and she told me how she called the police saying she was afraid of his violence, how crazy she was, and how she'd asked them to remove him from the outside of her property. I just thought she was bullshitting because normal people don't behave like that. Her weird behavior continued. She told me how she got a guy sacked at work. He'd apparently taken off work to watch a football match on TV and had put it on Facebook, so she informed her boss. This is definitely single white stalker female, and if you've ever been stalked, this is what stalkers do. Another day, she told me of how she was going for a supervisor's job. Apparently, Fresh Direct, where she worked, were getting a new team together, the Roots team. There was another girl going for the job who said she had been off sick with anxiety. I think Karen caused it, so she didn't deserve the job. Karen worked the phones, taking orders of fruit and vegetables for restaurants. Any calls that came in while the lines were busy would be placed on the answering machine and filled on the late shift. Karen bragged to me how this girl would only work the late shift because she made her nervous. She went on to tell me how this girl had come in to take over Karen's position one evening to sort the answering machine orders, but how Karen had deleted them to make the girl look bad. Karen went for a job interview with the idea of telling them how bad this girl was at their job. After not getting the job, Karen told me how this new team was being moved from Bicester further into Oxford and how she couldn't afford the petrol. Typing this reminded me, so I searched for this Roots team. They are still based in the same place where she worked in Bicester. One day, Dan drove me up to meet with Gay Dave again, me, fibro friend from the internet. I'd traveled back by train on my own, which was one in the eye of my agoraphobia. I told Vince about it and suggested he might try and visit an old friend to help us. Months later, he contacted me saying he decided it was a good idea. Only snag was he no longer had any friends where he lived. Would it be okay if he came to visit me for the day? I ran it past Dan and arranged to meet him in a public place. Vince arranged for his mom to be kept an eye on while he was gone, as he'd moved in as her carer. Between serious talks about health and agoraphobia, we had lots of laughs and a good day. At the weekend, Dan and I met up with Karen and our mutual friend Phoebe. Phoebe invited Dan over to her place to drink some Jack Daniels. Karen and I didn't like the stuff, so didn't want to go, so we all stayed at the pub. Karen then whispered in my ear about how Phoebe had invited Dan back on his own and how I couldn't trust her. A bit insensitive after our personal conversations a few weeks back, I thought. I see how she was trying to put a wedge between us all. Well, with what you already knew about her, why would you believe anything that comes out of her mouth, ever? Karen also didn't like being left out, which became really obvious one evening because it was summer and there was no outside space where I lived. Phoebe said I should go over to hers during the day as she was at home after losing her job. Hearing this, Karen's face turned to thunder. Karen would be working and didn't like the idea of me and Phoebe spending time together without her. I changed the subject and started talking about Nick. He was a funny guy that liked sending silly text messages to his friends. I showed Phoebe a silly one he'd sent me. Phoebe then said she'd received one, showed me, and we laughed about it. Karen was now glaring at us. The following weekend, Karen announced to us both she too had received a message from Nick too. Feeling relieved, I asked what hers said. Apparently she couldn't remember, and soon added how it was so rude I had to delete it before anyone saw it. Who exactly, being as she lived on her own. Oh, okay, who would see it, being that she lived on her own. I dropped the subject. I spoke to Nick about it, but she said he hadn't sent her any messages recently. Vince, meanwhile, had become depressed as his son had decided to disappear off to Japan without saying goodbye, never to be heard from again. He'd been in tears over this while talking to me, so I told him to come and visit and we'd cheer him up. Dan had already gone away to Switzerland to visit his friend whose little girl was dying. I couldn't get a hold of him. He must have been in the hospital, and I had to let someone know a stranger was staying over, so I told Karen. Karen decided Vince couldn't stay at mine because there were boxes everywhere after me redecorating. He would be much better off staying at hers in the spare bedroom. I ran this past Vince and he came over. We met in the same cafe and Karen met us soon after. Karen was messaging someone while we sat talking, then said, "Okay, let's get Vince and his motorbike down to mine." After locking his bike in her garage, we had coffee at hers. That's when Mick showed up. She introduced them, and she introduced them, said Vince was up for the weekend. His bike was in the garage, and we were going to Andy's engagement party at the pub later, an old friend of mine and Dan's. She saw Mick out and came back in, excitedly telling us that Mick had asked who Vince was and why he was staying at hers. She smirked and told us both how she told Mick it was none of his business, talking about winding Mick up. She didn't want him back, so why bother? Vince and I went to eat before going to the pub and arranged to meet Karen there. Karen just called as we were leaving and told us not to go over to the pub because Mick was drunk and had kicked off. What a setup. She came round soon after, excitingly saying how Mick had asked her if she was seeing Vince and how she'd once again told him it was none of his business. then disappeared off home, all hyped up like she was hoping for another fight. Obviously, she wanted to head us off before reaching the pub, so we couldn't put the record straight with Mick. You know, at this point, you already know what this woman's doing, so I don't know why you would be playing into it. Poor Vince was now stuck at my place without any of his belongings, wondering if Mick was going to turn up to beat him up while I was supposed to be staying at Dan's to feed the cats. When she found out Mick had been persuaded to join a dating site, she showed me how she joined the same one. Again, like, you should be calling her on every time you catch her, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? This is wrong. She said she hoped that she would be matched with him to do his head in. Instead, she got matched with a drummer that lived reasonably near. She now talked nonstop about going to see the band he played in. She then took up drum lessons with Bash. She never got as far as seeing the band or finding out what this drummer looked like. Instead, she turns her focus to Bash, thrusting every meaningless text message from him in my face like she was a teenager. Soon Bash and all the others was cast off. This time it was because Phoebe was apparently interested in him. Apparently not. According to Phoebe, Bash already got a girlfriend. The same kind of carry-on happened with her boss. See, now here's the question I gotta ask you with her. Why are you putting up with this? You're watching this happen, but you're not calling her out and telling her it's wrong. And this is why women like her get away with shit like this. Until she turns it on you. Then it becomes a problem. The same kind of carry-on happened with her boss, a client at work and a guy she slept with, but dumped because he talked too much. Though you'd be lucky to get a word in edgewise with her, even my brother complained about her and how she'd stripped down to her sports bra at a concert and kept leaning over him, sticking her breast in his face while he was sat down. I was there to witness it. When he avoided her by dancing, she turned her attention to Nick, who wasn't interested, because he started talking to the daughter of one of his exes. She told me how she was trying to get off with the underage girl. It also seemed everyone else's relationships were rubbish or doomed to fail. Phoebe's holiday relationship was just disgusting phone sex and wouldn't last. Cole would give Julie chlamydia and shag around her like he had with her, and that would teach them. Everything was also about sex to shock people. She would ask youngsters at the pub if they were playing with each other's toilet airs, and you were hanging around this person? Again, like, you have all this detail about this woman, but you're playing, you're just as guilty. She's asking young people, about, why would you go along with this? Playing with each other's toilet areas, or if they were giving each other sticky pants under the table. It wasn't the stroke that had changed her personality. It was like she was like it was with a guy I was seeing years ago when she'd lived with me. He was a black guy, and she would ask him if his butt crack was the same color as his palms. She would burst into my bedroom when he was there with a box of condoms she'd specifically stolen, throw them at him, and apologize for them not being skin colored. Or are they? She would ask, grinning. Why would you hang around a horrible person like this? There were times when she acted normal, but the attention seeking by shocking was becoming more and more frequent. I passed it off as her going through a hard time with splitting up with Mick, but not wanting to admit it. By now, my Chikari symptoms had started becoming so bad, my family got a little bit of money together so I could go to the USA to be officially diagnosed. Then maybe have the recommended operation after raising the money via charity, or just a partial fusion while I was there to stop my brainstem from being crushed so much with the money I'd already got. This kind of shit kills it if not treated. Obviously, Karen knew of my situation and of my plan to get to the USA with the little money available. The full op costs the same as a small house, so yes, it was a small amount in comparison. This is when she started trying to seriously split me and Dan up. Well, what do you think a toxic individual is going to... I mean, do you think this rabid dog wasn't going to turn on you eventually? As you're watching her manipulate all these other people, do you think she's not eventually going to get to you? During this slow scam, she arranged behind my back how Mick was going to move into my apartment and how I was going to move into her spare bedroom. A long story in itself. The money was in Dan's account because he was presumably going with me to the U.S. She persuaded me he was going to spend it all on a motorbike and how I couldn't trust him. She got me to get the money into my account. It was all over the amount of savings I was allowed to have if I was claiming social. So she was going to put it in hers first so it wouldn't be taken from me. Thankfully, it only got as far as my account before the following shit happened, making me have nothing to do with her. She didn't like me having friends of any sort by now. She tried turning me against Gay Dave and anyone that spoke to me at the pub, making up stories about them. Well, what did you think she would eventually do to you? This is surprising to you? You watched her do it to everybody else. Did you think you hang out with bad people, bad things are going to happen? She didn't like me having friends of any sort by now. She tried turning me against Gay Dave and anyone that spoke to me at the pub, making up stories about them. She tried the same crap with her ex Owen when he moved in next door to Dan. Some of my underwear went missing. This was from out of the laundry room, which stood out back, separate to Dan's house. She pointed the finger at Owen. I couldn't understand why anyone would steal my old shabby pants but leave my reasonably decent ones there. It didn't add up. I now believe it was Karen that stole them. She had the opportunity. I imagine she knew something she didn't want me to know. Karen insisted Vince come up for Halloween. I believe it was because the guitarist she no longer liked was playing at the pub. She wanted to pretend Vince was her new boyfriend as a one in the eye to the guitarist. Instead, I invited Vince up for his birthday so we wouldn't spend it alone. He didn't like being around drinkers because his ex was an abusive alcoholic. He was very nervous around anyone drinking. The episode with Mick had been enough, so we decided the three of us would go for a quiet meal. We told Karen of the plan, no drinkers, no pub. Even my partner wasn't invited because he was a drinker. I even explained to Karen, no presents, no joint birthday. My birthday was 2 days after Vince's, and I knew money was very short for him, and I didn't want him to feel he had to buy me anything. I also told Karen how I swore to Vince I couldn't even bake him a cake. So just for fun, I was just going to get him a little packet of mixed cake and tell him to bake his own. Surely Karen couldn't fuck any of this up. She quickly booked the table in my name without asking me because she invited Phoebe. Karen's favorite description of Phoebe was, she's a raging pisshead and loves kicking off at men. It now being rude to uninvite her, I told Karen she better explain to her it wasn't a drinking do. The week this was being arranged, Karen told me how her mom wanted to meet Vince and she was taking him over there the day after the meal. Unbeknownst to Vince, he didn't want to go, and I told Karen as much. She then told me her mom was concerned about him staying at hers because the council wouldn't be happy, as Karen was now claiming benefits. She knew as well as I did the council only needed to know he was living there. Her mom never wanted to meet anyone else who stayed over. Karen changed the subject, and I guessed I'd embarrassed her enough already. Well, the meal went well, not. Fiona turned up drunk. Karen turned it into a joint birthday between Vince and Phoebe, even though Phoebe's birthday was over a week away. Bought a dozen wrapped up packets of cake mix for Vince and presents for Phoebe. I got fuck all other than the usual emotional mess to clean up. I caught up with Vince the next day and explained how Karen had turned her mobile off and unplugged the phone before he went to bed, and how Karen's mom had turned up in the morning, nearly kicking the door in. She glared at him as she walked Karen into the kitchen to talk to her. He said there was no way he could ever stay at hers again. Could he stay at mine next time? I insisted he did after last night's stunt, and I told her as much. I spoke to Phoebe too, but she didn't quite understand what I was saying. Instead, she blamed herself for being drunk and asked me to apologize to Vince. Shortly after this, my neighbors started having parties every night until 4 a.m. I couldn't put a complaint unless I knew his name. All I could do was note down when the noise started and stop each day. I asked Karen if she knew his name, but she said she didn't. I was so tired I'd forgotten how she told me how she had to go up there with Mick to pay his son's drug debt. I asked Karen if she, and these people are on social benefits, right? But he's paying off drug debts. See, like everything is very hard to sympathize with here. Every day Karen would call me to talk about it, and you're not cutting them off, and you're playing into the whole thing. Luckily for me, a letter addressed to him came through my door by accident, so I found his name. I explained it to Karen and was about to tell her his name when she blurted it out. Looking shocked at me because she realized what she'd done, she quickly left, changed the subject as she did so. I convinced myself she must only have just found out. Karen called around a few days later. I was filling in my form for all the dates and times of the noise. I'd been writing it out in neat from the scruffy original while sat in bed. I fetched it from the bedroom and showed Karen while I went and made coffee. We talked about it and she left. Yep, you've probably guessed it. I couldn't find that form where she'd gone. I put it down to my so-called forgetfulness and copied it out again from the scruffy one. I didn't blame Karen at first. I was apparently always losing things, and usually my phone, even though it was always on my bedside table or the arm of the sofa, just in case I had a nasty dislocation when I came to go out and Karen was waiting for me. She would often find it in some strange place. Physical gaslighting. Was it really was what it was really, and had really screwed with my head to the point I couldn't trust my own judgment. The last straw was when I invited Karen and Phoebe round one evening. I had a recording equipment from the environmental agency set up for the night. I showed Karen the big microphone in the bedroom. I'd have to turn it on for the noise started up next door. I jokingly said I'd have to tell Phoebe about it before she thinks I'm making some weird sex movie. Karen said I shouldn't tell Phoebe anything because I couldn't trust her. Before I had time to remind Karen that Phoebe already knew I had problems with my neighbor because she had asked her if she knew his name. The doorbell rang. I let Phoebe in, make her drink, and told her about the microphone. "Oh, isn't it blank that lives next door?" she asked. At this point, I knew I'd been had and glared at Karen. Karen quickly tried covering her ass by saying, "Oh, I didn't tell you Phoebe's neighbor buys his or her cannabis from him. It turns out later everyone except me had known his name." I confronted Karen the next day. She said she'd only known for 3 weeks. 3 weeks to tell me, then I said. 3 weeks to tell me, then I said. She changed it to 2 weeks. I gave the same reply. She then tried to change the subject, saying how Mick's son had beaten his uncle up that lived in the same apartment block. "Irrelevant," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" She then disappeared into the living room. I thought to get her cigarettes. No, she was on the phone to Phoebe saying I had a problem trusting her. Phoebe, that is. I told Karen to just forget it and walked to the door shaking my head. Karen asked me if I wanted a lift, which I declined, saying I'd rather walk, even with dislocating joints. She then slammed the door behind me. She'd used Phoebe to start a fire elsewhere and take the heat off herself. Fuck her. I decided I wanted nothing more to do with her, especially after Phoebe and Karen had told her how I'd stormed out of her house saying, "I thought you were some kind of friend," and apparently me slamming the door behind me. Lying bitch. Karen had no doubt kept my neighbor's name from me for a few reasons. One, she didn't like me hanging out with Phoebe more often than her. Two, she'd chased Vince off since she couldn't have him staying at mine for the same reason. And the third reason, the money, I realized much later. My neighbor was evicted for non-payment of rent. Peace was restored, and so Vince came over to visit and stay over. That night there, the intercom rang at 1 a.m., but no one was there. But Karen had been seen doing it. Phoebe invited me and Vince, if he was around, over to hers a few times after my fallout with Karen. I tried my best to explain what happened and how she'd lied. Phoebe just wanted to forgive us and forgive and forget, and for us to get along again, to all get along again. Vince came over the following year after the snow and Vince came over the following year after the snow and Christmas were done. I had nothing to do with Karen for over a month. That's when we bumped into her as we were coming out of the supermarket. I predicted she might do as she probably saw us walk by. She told us she'd been informed she'd been a bit of a cow, but it was because the attitude of her work buddies, which had rubbed off on her. I tried not to laugh in her face, and she babbled on about how she got a friend staying over, Dave. How this friend had problems with his partner, and how this friend was just a friend. Weird. Then asked if we were going to the pub that night. We declined and said we had other plans. We walked back joking about how this poor friend of hers was probably her next male victim, and how he was probably already tied to the bed and hobbled like the film Misery. I heard later from Phoebe that our meeting had gone badly. I guess her not letting us go to the pub was the bad bit. Not long after this, I had someone from the housing department turn up. She wanted to know why I was still claiming rent benefit, as she still got records of me having moved. Apparently, I'd called them, canceling all other benefits, because I'd moved into a nursing home for young adults as my illness had become so bad. I guess it was a mistake, but the lady said it was deliberate and I should look into it, so I started to. Being friends with Phoebe made it difficult not to have contact with Karen. I couldn't expect Phoebe to hide her relationship with me to prevent Karen from getting jealous. So I started being polite to Karen and slowly became somewhat friendly again. Not that anything was ever talked about. That's when Karen met Matt. Karen and I were at the pub when we bumped into him. Drunk already, Karen remarked, "A lot of drinking and drugs going on for people on social benefit, I'll say that." "Well, I've just cremated my wife," he replied. She'd been cremated only a few days prior. Karen knew about this because I'd sorted his wife's dress out for him and gone to the funeral. Karen suddenly piped up, "My husband died last year and I'm really happy about it." I grabbed her by the hood and had a word with her at this point, and then smoothed the shit she'd made, just like I'd always done. By the time I came to leave, Matt could hardly work. He lived by Dan, so I walked him home and stayed at Dan's. Matt was so drunk and distraught. I left him. He tried kissing. When I left him, he tried kissing me. Obviously, he was feeling very lonely and mixed up. So the next day, I explained what happened to Dan. Dan was a friend of his, and I asked if he would keep even more of an eye on him. I explained the same to Karen, too. Her reaction was to tell me not to go there, as I'd never live up to his dead wife's reputation. What the fuck? It turned out it was because she was interested in him. I mean, you're just hanging out with bad people in a bad situation. Like, this doesn't keep happening. You're putting yourself in this situation. This isn't normal. Why is there so much drinking if everybody's on social help? I understand you have a condition. There's a lot of drinking and drugs going on. It seems like, to me, this is the mean girl clique grown up, disintegrating. That you're the head cheerleader's lieutenant and she's turned on you, which is going to happen. She called me the next weekend saying she had a date with him and was cooking him dinner. I went out with Dan and Nick. Karen and Matt were in the pub when we got there. We sat there, had drinks, and Matt backed out for dinner with her. Karen left and Nick and I had a few sharp words with Matt for messing her about. He told me I didn't understand. She harassed him into it and insisted showing me the number of texts she sent. This is high school shit. I mean, this is why this is going on, like, because you are in a high school mindset. Karen left and Nick and I had a few sharp words for Matt for messing her about. He told me I didn't understand. She harassed him into it and insisted showing me the number of texts she'd sent. I knew what she had been like, but insisted he'd at least apologize to her, like the lieutenants, like the head cheerleader's second lieutenant. You're not a very sympathetic person in all this. You're not. Karen asked if he'd spent the night chatting me up. A week later, Karen told me he had spoken to her and insisted on telling me how she'd taken him home and slept with him, but she hadn't seen him since. It turned out he wasn't interested in her, and he was very drunk at the time. Karen's version was she decided she didn't like him at all. The next time she did see him, Karen spent the night saying how she didn't like him, but got very possessive when he spoke to Phoebe. She wouldn't allow them to talk on their own and became so annoying that Phoebe asked Matt if he wanted to go over to hers for a drink and a chat. I mean, this is so much detail into other people's lives. It's a huge red flag here. As a grown woman, having this much detail into, like, this is high school nonsense. As they left, Dan, Nick, and myself had to physically restrain Karen while she was shouting at the top of her voice, "She's my best friend. She shouldn't be allowed to take him home. He'll break her heart." The next time I saw Phoebe, she was annoyed with Karen. She hadn't, like, why are you having anything to do with these people at this point? This is for you. You haven't grown up mentally. You haven't grown up mentally. You haven't. Even though you're married and you've been married for nearly 20 years, you haven't grown up mentally. You are stuck in a high school mentality. The next time I saw Phoebe, she was annoyed with Karen. She hadn't heard her yelling. She was annoyed that she turned up at her new workplace asking intimate questions while she was serving customers. Soon afterward, she was seeing Dave. I presume it was the same Dave that strayed over at hers she told me and Vince about. I met him at Phoebe's at the pub with Dan. She started making arrangements to meet up, but wouldn't turn up. I eventually had a word with her about it, and she said we needed to have a chat. Too bloody right we do, and I said she arranged to see me on the Saturday. I wasn't surprised when she didn't show up, and was even more glad that I didn't hear from her again until 9 months later. She texted me saying her PC had sent me an email, not her, and to not open it as it was a virus. I checked, and an email had been sent 2 minutes before she texted me. What BS. A week later, she saw Dan and asked him how I was. She hadn't been in touch because her phone was broken. More BS. I ignored it. That was when I got an email from her titled An Olive Branch. She'd apparently heard I wasn't well, BS, and was there anything I could do? Kind regards, Karen. I decided to email her telling her how I'd seen through her games and how she'd gone from the little lies we'd ignored about suddenly not liking all these guys she'd fancied the day before, and how that led to her thinking that she could tell bigger lies and get away with it, about her behavior with Matt and Phoebe, her manipulative using of Vince to make Mick jealous, and most importantly, the stunt at the meal and my neighbor. I told her it was obvious she didn't like me being friends with Phoebe or having friends stay over. How I wanted nothing more to do with her and hope she could learn something from it all and treat friends in the future with a bit more respect. This was her reply. All right, so this is Karen's reply here. I can't even be bothered to respond to this load of crap, so I will just take it as an introduction to your rant. Nothing more. As anyone else who was around at the time you were talking about has contradicted your version of events, including Mick and Bash, Phoebe, etc. If I thought it would help you to come to terms with your past deceptions, I would offer you their numbers so you can get your facts straight, eh? If the 4,500 plus word rant you have sent is an attempt to cover your own back regarding your own complete lack of honesty with your long-term partner, Dan, then put your mind to rest. I told no one about your 8-year void of sex with Dan, or the fact that you were, in essence, just his housekeeper. Your words, not mine. I also told no one about your friendship with Vince, including the sticky patches in his pants from you stroking him, blah, blah, blah. What I did say was I didn't want to know that you were playing a dangerous game with people's emotions. But she's accusing you of doing everything she did. Which is I don't know why this is surprising to you. This seems to be the turning point in our friendship. Apparently you wanted me to be compliant in your deception. The relationship between us appeared to go even further downhill when you realized the other person you thought would understand your game, she said, wanting nothing to do with. Again, out of friendship for Dan. Remember him. All right. And then she writes, okay, in black, she obviously wasn't aware Phoebe wasn't aware Phoebe kept inviting us round. I have never tried to make Mick jealous. We were separated for over 2.5 years before I started seeing someone else. I leave the mind fucks for making people jealous down to the professionals like you. This could explain why at the end of the very few relationships that I have had, I am still very friendly with all of them but one. I'm not sure I can be bothered to point out all the crap in your email, but I will try to correct a few until I get bored. I said Nick had sent a picture of a metal chicken to me and another weird message that I didn't understand. If you had bothered to listen to me instead of being so absorbed in your own agenda, you would have known that. I told you Nicola had sent provocative messages, but that I had dealt with them. Get your facts straight before you go smearing my good name and your lies. Yeah, that's projection. But what do you expect? What do you expect? You were her top lieutenant. It's ugly. It's ugly. I did not harass Matt, as you would know if it was any of your business. He would be, and this was a guy who insisted that she look at the amount of messages she sent. It would be strange for him to follow me back home a few weeks later after he came and sat with me at the pub without me inviting to him and apologizing for being a bit of an idiot. Yes, I did have him back to my home for the night. Didn't tell you at the time because I didn't want to upset you, as I felt you had him marked down as one of your avid admirers. Sorry. So again, maybe people don't tell you everything because they are afraid you will manipulate it to your own ends. More projection. He apologized for messing me around, and I put his mind at rest by pointing out he is not my type. He doesn't live with his mom, so maybe he is not your type either. A dig at Vince and at the career, his mom, and insinuating me being dishonest. The getting someone sacked for going to a football match, I don't know any such person or such situation. Think you may have to chalk that up to someone else. Again, lack of facts. I cannot answer for Phoebe to spend more time with you. She has told me about the situation between you, Vince, and her is for her to tell you, not me. I did not say anything about Phoebe and the guy she met on holiday, and your comments show that once again you picked on a grain of conversation between Phoebe and I in your company and distorted it to fit your worldview. It was said to my face. Pot calling the kettle black, I would say, considering the internet relationships you've had. Gay Dave, Vince, John, drummer, etc. Your brother. What the F? No idea what you're talking about. Never happened. Apparently the word count is 722, which is 720 more that I needed to reply with. Don't bother replying. All right. Obviously, it was written with the intent of her partner reading it to gaslight him. She was about to marry him after only 9 months and wouldn't want him finding out the truth. Instead, make me out to be untrustworthy by suggesting I was having an affair with the other witnesses. There is also no mention of any real issue of my apartment. For the first few months after the email, if she spotted me in the street, I would get a phone call the next day. It just wouldn't click. I would hear the receiver slam down. I told Julie about what happened and what had been said about Cole. Turned out she had an abortion, and that's why she couldn't have kids. She'd been showing up on her doorstep just so we couldn't cross-reference. She'd also harassed Julie to go to the wedding, no doubt thinking Cole would be jealous. Every hospital appointment I mentioned on Facebook would be canceled, apparently by me, so I had to block her partner and delete Phoebe. I now see how she was planning on manipulating situations to get me to have to move into hers so she could steal my money. But because that didn't work out for her, I was now suddenly being investigated for having too many savings. Coincidence? It took a year to prove where the money came from and that it was for my operation. And while that was taking place and becoming more sick, all my benefits were stopped. I had to try to pay a year's rent, etc. out of your own pocket while ill in bed. Was she trying to kill me off? I mean, you were ill in bed, but you were still going out with your friends and going to the pub here. You were ill in bed once your benefits got cut off? I spent so long dealing with this that I ignored finding out how my rent had been stopped previously. Later, I found out that it was her that had canceled my benefits agency, saying I'd moved into the nursing home. But unfortunately, because of the time that had passed, I couldn't get her done for it. I now see how it was most likely her that canceled my rent when she lived with me too, so she could get high up on the social housing list. This girl not only tried silencing me and destroying me via the smear campaign and preventing my medical needs, she dumped her personality onto me, started dressing like me, grew her hair like mine, and walked off using my personality to use just as another mask. I gotta be honest with you, Kay. You're just as guilty as she is. Did you apologize to any of the people she fucked over? Of the lies she was telling, of people she was screwing over, these lies? See, she won't take you seriously because you only called her on it was when she lied to you about something you wanted to know about the neighbor. So until it affected you directly, you didn't really give a shit. Because you were still hanging out with her, you're still involved with these people. You know, there's an entitlement about the entire story of everyone involved, you included. I understand you're sick, but you've been living. There is an entitlement about your whole story that is very disturbing, Kay. And it comes from living on entitlements your entire life. This refusal to grow up. You're living basically under the umbrella of the government, as is everybody in this situation, as there's drugs and drinking and fucking around and all types of shit, but yet you sent her a 4,500 word email. I mean, this is down to the death. I mean, you were basically the head cheerleader's lieutenant, and you got turned on. This is what happens when you hang out in a mean girl clique. And it continues. Eventually, you're going to get turned on. And this is what happens. So I hope this is a lesson learned for you. Okay, that this is eye-opening, that you controlled most of this. And yeah, she's a malignant narcissist, but I think you need to look at yourself as well. You went along with all of her lies until you saw she fucked you over directly over something that was really important. Then you wanted to call her out on her bullshit. Come on. Who's going to take you seriously at that point? Not her. These are bad people you're hanging out with all around. I don't think there's any good players anywhere. This is what happens when the head cheerleader turns on you. That's what happens. And there's an entitlement to your story and the whole thing and everyone involved. Screwing each other over for housing, social benefits, and I don't think you see it. I'm surprised you sent this to me like this. But again, this is what I got to be honest, and that's my honest assessment of your situation. So take this as a lesson learned and look at yourself, okay? Do you apologize for any of the people you know she fucked over and that you kept your mouth shut? Have you gone out and say, hey, you know what, that was wrong. I should have said something. I should have stopped it. It was wrong. You didn't. You didn't say anything until it affected you directly. Eventually, the narcissist is going to turn on you. So be it. But thank you again for your contribution and your story. Thank you to everybody watching over an hour. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comments section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just sponsor the channel in general, see it grow, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. And if you're still unclear, wait for the instructional video link to pop up on the screen at the end of this video to walk you through all of that. And if you're not seeing it, make sure your pop-up blocker is not on. Please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance.